I wrote a book called Explanations and Corrections in the Gospel of Luke. One of the chapters in it is called The Thinking of First Maccabees. In my book, I explain some of Luke's interpretation of the book of Daniel and Jesus's. However, it never sinks into anybody because, in my opinion, people are brainwashed by interpretations that come from 1st and 2nd Maccabees and from Josephus and others. And so in this video, I'm going to cover an example of typical interpretations of Daniel based on Maccabean times. But I'll have to continue this in another video. First Maccabees supports the dynasty of the Hasmoneans enthusiastically, as if the writer himself was descended from Mattathias. It supports the Feast of Dedication and another celebration to commemorate Judas's victory over Nicanor. The book supports the goal of achieving an everlasting, glorious remembrance in this life, not the goal of becoming worthy of everlasting life. Mattathias and Judas don't seem to believe in a resurrection in 1st Maccabees. It's possible that Mattathias didn't reject Daniel 12:2. He might have interpreted it figuratively, as did Porphyry, Ephraim the Syrian, and Luis de Alcazar. 1st Maccabees presents the martyrdom of the Maccabean martyrs as a misguided mistake. This book doesn't actually, that is to say, 1st Maccabees doesn't actually explicitly say that the defilement of the altar and the desolation of the temple caused by Antiochus was a fulfillment of prophecies in Daniel, but it seems to hint at it by using certain expressions from Daniel, such as abomination of desolation, by speaking of the desolation of the temple, and by using the word Kittim. The mention of Alexander the Great and some details about him in chapter 1 seem to refer to a fulfillment of Daniel to those who are predisposed to believe so, but not to an unbiased reader. In an introduction to the literature of the Old Testament, S.R. Driver inserted a chronological table of Antiochus's reign in chapter 11. He added to the table suggestions that certain passages in the books of the Maccabees and of Daniel are related. Driver's comment on 176 BC is accession of Antiochus to the throne of Syria. So he's saying here that the history is 1st Maccabees 1:10, and the fake prophecy is Daniel 7, probably Daniel 7, 8, 11, and 20, and certainly Daniel 8, 9, and 23, and 11, 21. Driver referred to 1st Maccabees 1:10 King James Version. I don't quote the King James Version since it's not public domain in all countries, so I'll quote the Douay where it is numbered is verse 11, and which says, "And there came out of them a wicked root, Antiochus the illustrious, the son of King Antiochus, who had been a hostage at Rome. And he reigned in the 137th year of the kingdom of the Greeks." Daniel 11:21 Douay says, "And there shall stand up in his place one despised, and the kingly honor shall not be given him, and he shall come privately, and shall obtain the kingdom by fraud." So he thinks that's a match, and many people would agree with him. Driver said that the writer of 1st Maccabees was referring to Daniel 8, 9, and 23, and also 11:21, and possibly also Daniel 7, 8, 11, and 20. Driver thought that those verses in Daniel were clearly about Antiochus' accession to the throne in 176 BC. But I don't think that much in Daniel 11 clearly means anything. James Hatley Frere thought that Daniel 11:21 was clearly about Napoleon, not about Antiochus. And I recommend that you look up 3 letters to see James Hatley Frere's interpretations and to see whether you think that they're just as valid as interpreters like Driver. I'm now simply examining passages where this book supposedly refers to the book of Daniel, not asserting what the meaning of Daniel originally was. Driver's comment on 170 BC and the 1910 edition is First Expedition of Antiochus against Egypt. Well, the history, 1 Maccabees 1:16 through 19, and the fake prophecy, Daniel 11:25 through 27. And then he says verses 22 through 24 are probably a general description of Antiochus's policy. And he says Antiochus on his return from Egypt enters the temple, carries off the sacred vessels, and massacres many Jews. The history behind that being 1 Maccabees 1:20 through 28, and the prophecy, which he considers to be prophecy after the fact, Daniel 8:9b through 10 and 11:28. These opinions are common. If you believe Driver, you will not believe Luke. Each reader can decide whether Driver is right that 1 Maccabees is alluding to Daniel, and secondly, whether Daniel 11:25 through 27 is about Antiochus's expedition against Egypt. James Hatley Frere thought that Daniel 11:22 in the King James Version, mentioned also by Driver, was clearly about the flood of Napoleon's armies from the summit of the Apennines to destroy 2 armies and also to inundate the plains of Lombardy. 1 Maccabees 1:16 through 19, King James Version referred to by Driver, corresponds to verses 17 through 20 in the Douay, which verses say, "And the kingdom was established by Antiochus, and he had a mind to reign over the land of Egypt, that he might reign over 2 kingdoms. And he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen, and a great number of ships, and he made war against Ptolemy king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid at his presence, and fled, and many were wounded unto death. And he took the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took the spoils of the land of Egypt." Daniel 11:25 Douay says, "And his strength and his heart shall be stirred up against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with many and very strong succors. And they shall not stand, for they shall form designs against him." So Driver is saying that the verses in 1 Maccabees correspond to the verses of Daniel that he cited. I don't think that the book is clearly alluding to Daniel. And I don't think that the verses in Daniel that Driver cited above are clear. Driver wrote concerning the year 167 BC, "Revolt against the persecuted measures of Antiochus, organized by Mattathias and his 5 sons, the Maccabees." 1 Maccabees 2 is the history, and Daniel 11:34, the little help, is the supposed after-the-fact prophecy. Driver's interpretations are common, but I say in my book that neither Luke nor Jesus cared about 1 Maccabees, so no Christian should, and I say in this book that Luke interpreted Daniel in a manner unlike any other commentator. I also say that since Jesus ignored the 11th chapter of Daniel, we should too. Here is my guess why the author of 1 Maccabees seems to just hint at Daniel sometimes, whereas he was unmistakably clear when he referred to the stories of the fiery furnace and the story of Daniel in the lion's den. He knew that many readers at his time would consider the interpretations that we called Maccabean to be preposterous. But the author of 1 Maccabees might have thought that he could safely adorn his book with terminology from the book of Daniel as long as he only hinted and was not specific. That way he could deny that he was interpreting the book of Daniel to anybody who objected. His goal was not to explain the book of Daniel, but to glorify Judas Maccabeus as Savior of Judah, and to encourage the celebration of two holidays to honor Judas. On the other hand, his hints or allusions to Daniel may be imaginary, only existent in the minds of some readers. In other words, he might not have meant any allusion at all. When the writer of 1 Maccabees wanted to make a clear scriptural reference, he knew how to do it. I will mention some examples a little further below. I objected in a previous chapter that it does not make any scriptural sense for a pagan sacrificer idol, which was put on the altar in the temple by a pagan warlord, to be called an abomination of desolation. Manasseh's idolatry fit Deuteronomy chapters 28 through 30, but Antiochus' idolatry didn't. Many early readers of 1 Maccabees 157, as the verse is numbered in the Douay, surely recognized that. Luke said that the abomination of desolation was an army that would tread Jerusalem, not an idol. That made scriptural sense to some ancient Jews who understood the fourth beast of Daniel 7 to be an abomination that was prophesied to desolate. 1 Maccabees said that the temple was desolated in the sense that it looked like abandoned, damaged property. 1 Maccabees 4:36 through 38 says, "Then Judas and his brethren said, Behold, our enemies are discomfited. Let us go up now to cleanse the holy places and to repair them. And all the army assembled together, and they went up into Mount Zion. And they saw the sanctuary desolate, and the altar profaned, and the gates burned, and the shrubs growing in the courts as in a forest or on the mountains, and the chambers joined into the temple thrown down." The preceding passage may be factual, but only sounds like a prophecy in Daniel if you're already predisposed to think so. Now, Jerusalem, 1 Maccabees 3:45 Douay says, "Now Jerusalem was not inhabited, but was like a desert. There was none of her children that went in or out, and the sanctuary was trodden down." The language is reminiscent of Luke 21:24 and of the stamping and treading by beasts in Daniel 7 and 8, but the desolation of the temple predicted by Jesus of Nazareth and explained by Luke was the utter destruction of Jerusalem by an abominable Roman army. Jesus was not talking about repairable damage like burned gates and shrubs growing in the courts of the temple. According to Luke 21:6 Douay, Jesus said, "These things which you see, the days will come in which there shall not be left a stone upon a stone that shall not be thrown down." That desolation was to be performed by an army, Luke 21:20. It can be inferred from the parallel verses in Mark and Matthew that that army was the abomination of desolation of Daniel. The desolation in treading described in 1 Maccabees 3:45 hardly compares with the desolation in treading that occurred in the first century and thereafter, the one predicted by Jesus. Sir Isaac Newton acknowledged this manifest fact in chapter 8 of his Observations upon the Prophecies of Daniel. The horn cast down the sanctuary to the ground, and so did not Antiochus. He left it standing. And I'll try to put some additional information in the YouTube video where it says view more. There's a little arrow you can click for more information.